I'd like to introduce my mentor and friend, great teacher, Dr. James Doty.
Dr. Doty.
His name is Jim Doty. He's a clinical professor of neurosurgery at Stanford University and founder and director of the Center of Compassion and Altruism Research and Education.
I learned a sort of a manifestation technique from a woman in a magic shop. And this is actually about my first book, which is called Into the Magic Shop, A Neurosurgeon's Quest to Discover the Mysteries of the Brain and the Secrets of the Heart. And that story is about my own childhood growing up in poverty with an alcoholic father and a mother who had had a stroke when I was a child.
Wow.
Was partially paralyzed, had a seizure disorder, and chronically depressed and attempted suicide multiple times. And we were on public assistance. Well, you know, but this is also an example of how one person can intervene and change somebody's life. I'll tell you a couple stories, though, that tells you how the system works, even though you haven't done all the typical things to make it work. I'll tell you how I got into medical school and how I got into college. I was so clueless about college, even though I said I was going to go to college. I was in a science class and there was a girl sitting next to me and she was filling out her college application. I had no clue about that.
That you had to apply or...
Yeah. I was sort of waiting until it was supposed to happen.
Sure.
So I looked at this girl and I asked her what she was doing. She said, well, I'm applying to college. And this is the application. I said, really? And she looked at me, she said, yeah. And I said, well, where are you applying to? And she said, UC Irvine. And she looked at me and she said, where are you applied? I said, UC Irvine.
Yeah. That was the process.
Said, I haven't got my application yet. She said, I have an extra one.
Wow, there you go. And
yeah, and I filled that out and, you know, I got in.
You were given the opportunity that you saw that was in front of you. You didn't think beyond other schools. You saw something, you didn't know another process. Said, yeah, I'm going to go there as well. And she said, here's the application. You filled it out, you got in, and you went there. Right?
Yeah, no, and that's my point is, it was in there. I didn't know how it was going to play out.
Yes.
But it played out, and it certainly wasn't the typical way
process.
It would play out.
Yeah, exactly.
So then what happened is, you know, I had a lot of struggles. I had to leave college multiple times, as an example, to get my father out of jail, or to deal with my mother who attempted suicide, which are not pleasant things to have to go through. And so when I applied to medical school, the average GPA to get into medical school was 3.79 at that time, which is, you know, out of 4, that's like an A-, right?
Yeah, sure.
My GPA then was 2.53. I was not going to graduate from college.
Right.
Many of my friends were pre-med, and they were the type of pre-meds who had 3.7. It was very hurtful because they said, you're never going to be a doctor. That GPA, what a joke, right? Which, you know, this is your dream. So anyway, we used to have to, or you used to have an interview with the pre-med committee. So you had to go get an appointment, and then they would write a letter of recommendation for you. So I went to the office. I asked the secretary, I said, I want to make an appointment for my pre-med. She looked at me, she said, I'm not going to give you an appointment. I said, well, why? You know, she had pulled out my file. She said, because it's a waste of everyone's time.
Oh, man.
Now, can you imagine a human being telling you that you're a waste of their time?
Wow.
I mean, how hurtful. But I looked at the woman, and I said, you know, I appreciate what you're saying, but I said, I am not leaving here until you give me that appointment.
Wow.
I said, if you want to call security, that's fine, but I am not leaving. So she did. So it comes time for my appointment. Now, so I go into this room, and I'm at one end of this long table, and I'm, 20 years old maybe? And then there are these 3 people at the other end of the table. And the guy in the middle, he has my file. And he looks at me, says, he takes the file, lifts it up, throws it on the table, and he says, say what you have to say so we can get this over.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
And you sit there and, you know, how intimidating. So what happened is I looked at the guy and I said, I am not going to let you turn me into a grade point average. I'm a human being.
Wow.
So I proceeded to lecture them for about 20 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
They were all crying at the end. And so what happened is they ended up actually giving me the highest letter of recommendation.
Wow.
And as I was leaving, that secretary actually was in the room. She said, listen, I want you to take this. and it was a trifold brochure for a summer enrichment program at Tulane University in New Orleans for socioeconomically disadvantaged students and minority students. And she looked at me and she said, I have to tell you something though, the deadline has passed, but I don't think that will impact you.
Wow.
And I applied to one medical school and got into one medical school. Wow. And I didn't have a degree.
Wow.
And so the point of the story is no one has the ability to tell you what you can and cannot do. In theory, by every, quote, criteria, I should never have gotten into medical school, right? Yet, I'm one of the largest donors to the medical school. And in fact, they're actually building a Doty Center for Compassion in Medicine. When you grow up in an unpredictable, chaotic environment, you're essentially in a war zone every day. As a result, it chronically stimulates your sympathetic nervous system or your flight, fight, or fear response. And what happens is that affects your brain in the sense that it cuts down options because you're looking at the shortest distance you have to go to survive. As a result, you can never relax. You're always fidgety, you're always looking around because you never know what's going to happen next. So she taught me a technique of what we call a body survey now, how to relax your body. And then she taught me how to concentrate, in this case by looking at a candle and doing a breathing exercise. And these are the fundamental techniques associated with the mindfulness practice because then it shifts you from engagement of your sympathetic nervous system to engagement of your parasympathetic nervous system, which is really where we should live. You're open, you're thoughtful, you have access to your executive control areas in the brain in terms of memory and experience, and you're much more creative. And you're able to make that shift that changes how you look at the world. Everyone, we have a negative dialogue going on in our head.
An inner critic.
Yes, and everybody has an inner critic. And so she also taught me to recognize that that wasn't truth. If you tell yourself it's not possible, by definition, it is not possible. It cannot happen. And so when people listen to that, they're giving their self-agency away. And in some ways, this is the nature of how we take control of our manifestation. There is not some external entity deciding your fate because you're a good or a bad guy, but we have immense power within us to control our destiny. And when you give it away and listen to that critic, then you're limiting your beliefs. So the key is, how do you unlimit your beliefs, if you will? And that is understanding the incredible power you have within yourself. When you sit there and say every day, I'm not worthy, I don't deserve love, it's not possible, I'm an imposter, I can't do it, it's as if you're building a prison for yourself with bricks.
Wow.
And the wall gets higher and it gets darker and you feel more and more powerless. And you feel like there's some external force controlling your life. When you understand within you is an incredible power to change your destiny, and you have that power, and finally you recognize it, then extraordinary things can happen. So this interaction with this woman taught me to relax. She taught me to be present, and then strange things happened. When I changed how I looked at myself, it changed how I looked at the world, and that changed how the world reacted to me.
What is the number one thought and number one emotion that blocks us from the ability to manifest greater?
Fear. It's insecurity, it's shame, and this results in you limiting your beliefs. And so in some ways what we're talking about here actually is a decision between fear and love, right? And when you're fearful, this stimulates your sympathetic nervous system with all the negative aspects of it. When you love, you're open, you're generous, you're thoughtful, you're kind, because you've engaged the parasympathetic nervous system. And you have a choice. This is like if you look at Stoic philosophers, like somebody like Epictetus, who was a slave. He says, I cannot control my external environment. What I can control is how I react to my environment. Right? When we think that things are impossible, when we think that it can't happen, or I don't have the criteria that is usually, don't ever believe anything anyone tells you. If I believed what so many people told me was not possible for me to do, I would never have accomplished anything. And again, it gets back to this limiting your beliefs. Once you unleash this understanding of the power you have, then you can do almost anything.
Yes.
You just have to believe.